I'm Yvette Long, and I'm so excited to see you all here. We'll be talking today about African American history. American history. It's really American history, and I'm just adding a little flavor of the Americans of African descent and their contributions and sacrifices that they've made for the last 400 years in this country, and giving you a taste of maybe some of those individuals and some of their experiences. Because I think it's so important as Americans that we understand our full history. Unfortunately, our current educational system doesn't really give anything other than a kind of a Eurocentric view of our history and our experiences. And to a large extent, it's causing a great divide. And we need to bring our country together. And to do that, we have to recognize the contributions and sacrifices, especially of those, of Americans of African descent who have been here for 400 years. They arrived here with the first colonists. So this is kind of that beginning of that story. So I'd love to share it with you, and thank you. I'm excited to get started. I wanted to also, before we get into, sorry about that. Before we get into some of our first stories, I just want to share a little bit about myself and that why I wrote this material, African American History, The Untold Stories, the book. And I also have the complimentary online courses, is I wrote it for boys. I run a nonprofit organization for boys. I'm also a psychologist. And I took that in as a psychologist, and I wanted to give the young men in the program a sense of self-efficacy, an understanding of their history and their ancestors, so that they have an appreciation of their value and who they are and what has come before them. History is so important. It helps us, prevents us from making past mistakes. History is just a very important tool, and Americans of African descent don't really have that tool which to rely upon for understanding of what has come and their contributions and how their various achievements. So I thought that was important as a psychologist, that everyone should have that information. Many of us get that from our families. We bring that history with us, but we know the Africans never had that opportunity because their history was taken away from them. So there wasn't a history. The only history they had was the history that was given to them by the colonists, and the colonists basically gave them no history and continued that for the last 400 years. So they're almost without a history other than the narrative that was created for them, which we know that to a large part is all one-sided and only looks at the Africans as slaves, but not the full picture. So this was an opportunity to shine some light, and this is an opportunity to share those stories with all of you. So here is the first person we'll talk about is Phyllis Wheatley. And Phyllis Wheatley is a young woman that was brought here from Africa when she was 7 years old. She was lucky to have been brought to a New England family that was very kind, and they taught her to read and write. And after learning to read and write, Phyllis, at the age of 13, published her first poems. And she is considered only the second female published poet in the United States, in this country. There was only one other female that had published any poetry works before Phyllis Wheatley. And she really influenced the way that, because of her life as a slave, she was able to share about her experiences, about slavery, and how unjust it was. And people were very interested. As you know, during that particular time, early colonial periods, we didn't have the media, we didn't have photography, we didn't have movies, we didn't have some of those things to tell stories. We only had what people told us. And we know that the Africans were told to say that you loved your work, to say that your master was kind. And so the real stories were not really told. It was very difficult to get a very clear understanding of what slavery was like. I mean, of course, those who owned slaves understood it, but they were the very few. They were the wealthy. The majority of Americans did not own slaves. So this is a wonderful story about Phillis Wheatley that introduces you to some of these individuals, that you can take this information and take it forward. This is a story about Mary Fields. And Mary Fields herself, she was a slave. And when she was emancipated, she kind of traveled and ended up in Montana, where in Montana, of course, she carried this rifle. She was known to, also maybe have a revolver in her boot. And she was just an amazing woman that was fearless. And she was sought by the U.S. Postal Service to deliver mail. And she became the first female Lone Star mail carrier, which is in its own right unbelievable that a woman would carry mail. Even for men, that it was a career that was a short career for anyone that had that job, because you had to carry the mail across very treacherous territory. And she was known to have had that career for 10 years and had never missed a day of carrying the mail. They were saying she had carried mail through all kind of inclement weather. She had there was legends. She was a legend of her time, really. And she was known to be able to punch out a man with one punch. So people did mess with Mary, but she was very kind. She was a very kind person, but also understood that there was a lot of racism during that time and white supremacy, and she carried her rifle everywhere she went. So she stood up to anybody that would try to put her down or not treat her like she felt she needed to be treated. But she became very known in the town where she lived, and very well respected, because she was just known to do just very nice, very kind things for others. And we have Bass Reeves. He's another interesting. He was a cowboy. Now, just notate that note there that Mary Fields was also a cow woman. She was a cow woman. So because she lived among the West, and so did Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves at a young age was enslaved, and he escaped and ended up in Indian Territory, where they took him in and he became one of them. I mean, the Native Americans during that time understood what was in store for the Americans of African descent, and for many of them befriended them. And Bass Reeves was a friend, and he actually learned multiple languages. And later, after emancipation, he decided to come back into society. And he was discovered by a sheriff who asked if he would become a marshal. And he became the first Black marshal west of the Mississippi. And he became a legend in his own time. And it's just remarkable to think about how these individuals, Mary Fields as well, and we even talked about Phillis Wheatley. Each of them really bought into and believed in the values of what America stood for. And Phillis Wheatley was known to have written a letter. Going back a minute here, she was known to have written a letter to George Washington, and saying, she was, proud of the work that he had done during the Revolutionary War, but that she thought that things could be better if he could end slavery. So in her writings, she talked about the abolitionist movement, and to a large extent, some say her writings help, keep that movement alive. Abolitionists have been with us since slavery. Many Europeans have been against slavery and have fought to end slavery. It's much like the government today, where we're trying to get things that are right for the people, but we have legislators who are in power. And during that time, it was very difficult to get the powerful and the rich out of power because they owned everything. And most of them were slave owners. And the slave owners were the wealthiest people in the country, if not in the world, to a large extent. And Bass Reeves was, as I talk a little bit more about Bass Reeves, just want to give you a little bit, more information, because I want you to take these individuals and, really go beyond just the little information that I'm providing to see the rich history. And you see the many cowboys in the back there. People aren't aware, most Americans aren't aware that 20% more than 20% of the cowboys were of African descent. We don't see that. They're not shown in any, very few Africans are shown in Westerns, but they were very active with cattle, horses. They were in rodeos. They were a very instrumental part of the Wild West and of the West. And Bass Reeves was a legend as a marshal. He was known to have brought in like 2,000 or so criminals during his time. And if Bass Reeves was on your trail, it was a matter of time before you'd be caught and brought in. And he carried a rifle and two revolvers, what could shoot from either hand accurately. Just an amazing person, and earned a lot of respect from everyone who knew him. So another legend that we don't know very much about that I would, really, employ everyone to, check him out, get some more information. These are wonderful stories that are part of our American history. And then we go into like Lewis Latimer, because there's so many stories that I couldn't put them all in the book, but I try to pick out some individuals because, as I said, as a psychologist, my intent was to kind of change our perspective, change the lens, give us a different view of looking at Americans of African descent, something that we weren't familiar with, and this started with. So I think the book does that. It from the 100 or so people and reviews that I've had that have come back have said that the material does provide a different lens, a different perspective. And once we have a different perspective, we have different relationships. We have different interactions, we communicate differently as a result of increased knowledge. And I think the way that the knowledge is presented, as a psychologist, I try to look at how we can use history to change to rid ourselves of prejudice and bias and bigotry, because a lot of it is not based on facts or experience. It's just some idea that we have or something that we've heard or some rumor. And as we know now, there's all these conspiracy theories. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about who Americans of African descent really were throughout history. So this helpfully shed some light on some of those stories. And Lewis Latimer was a draftsman, self-taught, and became eventually had several different inventions and was very instrumental in the light bulb. He created the filament for the light bulb, worked with Edison, worked with Bell, was amongst the team that created the light bulb, and went on to have the first published electrical lighting book. When they wanted to have, he's the one who created lighting so that we could light cities and street lighting. That was Lewis Latimer. They would have to come and get Lewis Latimer and say, how do we light this street? What are we doing? And he would show them how to create lighting for some of the biggest cities in our nation, not only in Europe, but also here in Canada and in New York City. Lewis Latimer was our guy for when we wanted to have street lighting. Thanks to Lewis and his creativity. Just you'll see throughout history the creativity of the Americans of African descent and the ingenuity and original thoughts that they have, and they lend that to different things that they're involved in. We're not going to talk today about some of the scientists, some of the other scientists, because there's just too short a period of time. We don't have that much time to talk about everyone. I'd love to, but we don't have that much time. But there's a lot of these individuals are in the book, and the stories are written so that we can really begin to change our perspective and change our lens on how we view and interact. Once we have this knowledge, we interact differently, and we view individuals differently, and it opens our horizon and our ability to respect and appreciate one another for our uniqueness. We're all unique. We're different, and we have to celebrate those differences rather than condemn them or find fault. Some We're all going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to look different. We're going to say things differently, but it doesn't mean that we're bad or that's wrong. It's just not something that you're familiar with, but it's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. If we can see things that way, I think that's where we want to move to, is respecting and appreciating the fact that we're not all the same, but we want the same thing. So we have a lot in common as Americans, and to focus on those things. And you have Josephine Baker, which, I don't want to make sure, we have a good introduction of Josephine Baker, because she was a very famous singer and performer, and one of the most famous women of that particular time in the world. And she had a love-hate relationship with the United States because of segregation and Jim Crow laws and the black laws that wouldn't allow blacks and white to be in the same theaters together. And even though most of her audience were white, she eventually said, I can't do this anymore. I can't, I feel like I'm supporting this segregation, this racism, and it's just wrong. And she ended up moving to France, where she lived there as, a very successful woman. But she still had a heart for America, and she became a spy during the war, and helped really end the war with the Germans, when she was able to bring, she was kind of espionage and bringing and documents and things that help, as a spy, help the Allies win the war. So many of you'll see, if you're read this book, or you get any kind of history of Americans of African descent, you'll get to see that, begin to notice this patriotism. And if you go back, really back in beginning of time, a lot of the laws that we have in our nation was because they were fought by the Africans, to have the right to practice religion, the freedom of speech. All of these things came about, and they were instrumental in a lot of the laws and liberties and justice for all. They were always in those, some intertwined in making sure and ensuring that we're moving our country forward, and that citizens' rights are respected, and that we have these rights. Wonderful stories. I just marvel at the bravery of some of these individuals, that they had to go through that time. If you could only imagine the life that they experienced, and how could anyone live through what they had lived through and still have the hope for the future? It's amazing. And this is, some of us have heard about Black Wall Street. This is one of the famous Black Wall Street, and you can see that on this slide here, it was a beautiful town and city that the Africans had done very well for themselves. They self-governed. They had their own police, their own hospitals, their grocery stores, laundromat. Even an African was one of the individuals who invented the dry cleaning. But so that's a different story. But you can, see that they were very prosperous when they were able to just live their lives. And since they couldn't live amongst the whites because of white supremacy, there was always that group that couldn't stand to see them succeed, um, and felt that whenever they acquired something, that somehow that made them feel less than. So they would have to destroy what they had, to bring them down to a different level that was lower than their level. Rather than achieving themselves, they felt that if they were at a low level, that person had to be at even a lower level than what they are. So they would either take their property, burn their property, or kill them if they opposed um, them. So this is an example. If you can see, this beautiful town was burnt to the ground, and this is not just one city after Reconstruction. There was over 300 towns and cities that were built and populated by and self-governed by Americans of African descent that we are not aware of. Their prosperity, we don't hear those stories. We hear, um, today, those comparisons, which we should get away from comparisons. Black's wealth is not as, this, or, they haven't done as well over time. And the reason why they haven't done well is their generational wealth has always been stolen from them, or, as you can see, burnt to the ground. You can't develop and prosper if every time you make a move and you succeed or do something, someone takes your home, takes your property, runs you off your property, kills your husband, your businesses. That has happened throughout history. And you can see this is 1921, not that long ago. They were still killing Americans of African descent, African business people, destroying their towns, their homes. So there was no opportunity to have generational wealth. They would try, but they always had to start from zero. Who does that? Many of, we know people's families have, generation after generation, they're able to hand down things to their families. But Africans have never had that luxury, because whatever they've acquired has been taken from them. Whenever they acquire it, because of white supremacy, is like, who thinks you can't own that? You can't have that property. We're taking that from you. And they literally took oil property that had oil in the Texas areas where there was minerals and things like that in the properties. It was just taken from them. So, there's probably many African Americans that should have been wealthy, because very, very wealthy, because of their property that they own had minerals of some sort, anything from coal to oil. But it was when that was discovered, that property was taken from them. They worked very hard for what they acquired. And then we have the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers are just amazing men that, we love our military men. I don't care if you're white or black, or, what color you are. It doesn't really matter. I don't see things as terms of color, and I don't think we should. I think we should, not be saying, black soldiers, white soldier, this person was a black person who did this, a white person did that. It's just a person. Why can't we just recognize people for their accomplishments, and rather than for their accomplishments plus their color? Does that really matter? It really doesn't. And hopefully, we'll move beyond those types of comparisons, because it's very simplistic and simplified. And hopefully we're, evolved as a country, as a nation of people, that we're not so simplistic, that, we look at, color, that we really begin to look at the merit of who people are. But the Buffalo Soldiers fought in every war in this country. Amazing stories. They helped with the settlers who, at a period of time, the government gave many Europeans free property if, they would go and go out west. They wanted to kind of get the populations, kind of the move beyond just on the East Coast. And so they said, if you know, move out to the west, you can have free land. So that's caused the big settlers to move out west. But many were afraid, and they faced bandits, Native Americans, different, crime and criminals that would take their properties and kill them and what have you. So the Buffalo Soldiers were one of the group of individuals that were sent out to help the settlers, to protect them and to help them get settled. They were notorious. They were called the Buffalo Soldiers by the Native Americans because they were said to be fierce fighters, and they had hair like wool. So really interesting. So, and the Buffalo Soldiers were also some of the first fire jumpers out in California when we had, they were dropping, our enemies were dropping air fire bombs in some of our forests. They sent out the Buffalo Soldiers to put out those fires. So they had to, they were some of the first fire jumpers. So amazing stories of patriotism. The Buffalo Soldiers, Buffalo Soldiers, Mary Fields, Bass Reeves, Phyllis Wheatley, and many more, bought into the ideals of this nation. Even those who built some of these, our greatest institutions here in this country, and buildings and the streets and the roads and all that was done by the Africans. They were said to have worked 16 hours a day, and they were only given one pair of clothing for the last them for the year. So when you see pictures of the Africans and the slaves that have their pants really short, because they were given one pair of clothes for the whole year to last them, and one pair of shoes. So many of them were barefoot because they weren't given additional clothing. They worked, tirelessly to build the streets and roads and to tear down the trees. That this was a very wooded area when the settlers first came here, and the Africans made it inhabitable, for people to live here. And some of those were the Buffalo Soldiers. So these are just some of the stories. I mean, I can go on and on because it's just wonderful stories. And the next time I see you, I'd love to share even more stories with you. And I just want to let you know, I might be in my character because, when I was younger, I was an actress and a singer. And so I love to have a little theatrical theater. So you might see me if you come on to my YouTube page. You might find me in character. You might find me with a different look because I do have different looks that I like to share because I like to have a little bit of fun with telling the stories because I just love the stories. But I get a little bit bored too with just the same storytelling. So I try to mix it up a little bit, but it's still me. And please, explore some of these great stories that are in our history. And it was wonderful talking to you. Until we meet again, enjoy, and don't forget to visit the website, African American History, UTS.com, and African American History UTS.info. Have a wonderful day and enjoy all these great stories.